The ultimate melee tier list for 10.2. Do you want to pick a main and you want to make sure that it does good damage and performs well in Mythic Plus and in raids as well, because this is a combination of the two? Then we're going to take a look at all of the new changes, performance updates, and everything of all of the melee in both raids and Mythic Plus, and conjoin it in one big blob of a tier list ranking prediction. Arms Warrior has received changes, of course, not that many, and still not good enough to propel it upwards. In Mythic Plus, it might do okay. It still has that really nice arms AoE rotation, plus the tier set giving you some thunderclap love and juiciness is all really well and good, but in terms of single target, it still feels like it's very, very lackluster. Sure, the tier set gives you some executes and some bleeds from executes, and that's great, but it's just not good enough to keep up with everybody else. I've been struggling and thinking exactly where to put arms, but I think C tier is just kind of where it belongs because it needs more love. It needs a little bit more pump. It needs to get back to actually being that execute spec that kind of defined the whole execute system, because currently it just doesn't feel like it. It might get buffs, but until then, C is where it belongs. Assassination Rogue. Boy, oh boy, how the tables have turned for Assassination Rogue. And this recent look at what Assassination has been doing in both raids and Mythic Plus kind of matches with what I've been personally testing for Assassination, and it slaps really hard, both in Mythic Plus and in Dungeons. In raids, it's looking like it's going to be better than in Mythic Plus, kind of like around S tier-ish in raids, but Mythic Plus is about A tier, B tier, which is still good considering that for about 2 expansions, it was at the bottom of our tier list. So I'm happy putting Assassination all the way into A tier list. It has received a couple of buffs, plus the rework with all the talents that it has going on has a lot of options in dealing damage with Caustic Splatter, with Sanguine Blades. I think that's what they're called. And the tier set is pretty gnarly, plus it has some of the biggest single target bursts I've ever seen or tested in a spec so far. So that is really, really, really good. And since a lot of people watch these tier lists to figure out what to play, main or alt, once you do decide what it is, you can take it a step further and actually record your gameplay. We do it with the sponsor of this video, Outplayed, and recommend it to everyone as well. More and more people start either putting their gameplay up online or making clips of it to share with friends and communities in general. This is so easily done with Outplayed, it's not even funny. The app is giga easy to get and use, and it's free on top of it all. Once you have it installed, you can customize it to your liking, and when you have your recorded gameplay, you can easily clip it and share it with just a couple of clicks. The first one being on the link in the description to get Outplayed really quick, and you will also be supporting this video and the work we did to put it out there for everyone. Thank you Outplay for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to Havoc Demon Hunter. Also a part of the rework shenanigans, Havoc has taken quite what's the opposite of a nosedive? Well, considering that it was very outperforming, it was doing very well on the PTR testing. I kind of expected it to be nerfed a little bit because it was a little bit ridiculous, but it hasn't been nerfed a lot. It has received some nerfs, but it's still looking like it's going to be an S tier spec, both in Dungeons and in Mythic Plus. This is really, really cool. It's back to Havoc, baby. Is this BFA again? Well, you know, enough about that, but Havoc did receive a lot of changes in the way that it's doing damage and the rework as well. There is a point to be made about, you know, Vengeance is also looking kind of good. So if we're talking about high-end performance, Havoc doesn't really bring a lot of Demon Hunter uniqueness that you might want from Havoc, but the damage is there. You're a lot tankier with all of the passive physical damage reduction that you have incorporated in the new rework, plus a bunch of new ways to deal damage with the tier set and access to some of the defensives that were previously inaccessible or at least very hard to get to. I think Havoc is going to rock our socks off, which is great because we've been missing Havoc lately, to be honest. Outlaw, funny enough, why do we have these back to back? Outlaw is also S tier. It's doing amazing in Mythic Plus and it's doing amazing in raids, period. It's just really good. It's kind of like Havoc where you're looking at Outlaw and you're like, dude, this is gonna get nerfed, right? But it's not. So here we are. Until further notice, Outlaw is looking to be pushing things really well with the new rework as well. It looks like the reworked classes and specs are just doing really well, which let me preface this by saying this is not entirely surprising. This is how the the natural flow of rework classes are. It's normal for them to be outperforming because you want people to start playing them and kind of test things out. That's how Ret was before it was nerfed. So likely at the beginning of the patch, you can play, we're getting to sub as well. You can play all of these specs and you're going to have plenty of fun. Plus, with the changes to the AoE blind in Mythic Plus, Outlaw is back, baby. Survival, I have overly estimated in our previous tier list, but not by too much. Survival is around B tier-ish. It's a solid spec. It has its issues. It's still a hunter spec. It's particularly very squishy in the super high end of content, and you're definitely gonna feel it if you're also playing stuff like Rogue or Demon Hunter, which are significantly more tanky. But the damage is there. It has super high burst damage. Its damage profile is about, I think, 45 seconds, where Fury of the Eagle is at the moment, or at the very most 1 minute, depending on how you're tuning and matching your cooldowns. That's going to be really good with the Bomb Bonanza. That is the new tier set for survival. So it's going to be solid. B tier is about solid. B tier is like you're gonna be fine. You're probably going to be seeing a difference between you and the top performers of other specs, but unless they're gods at their craft and you're proficient on survival, and everybody else that's going to be tier probably going to be doing really high damage. Similar with that is Enhancement. Hasn't received too many changes lately from what I remember, and it was still pretty good. I will still put it into A tier for both raids and dungeons. It is the prime Shaman spec at the moment. I know Elemental is doing some damage, and we'll get to that in a rage tier list. But for now, Enhancement is giga strong. A lot of good changes with the new tier set. You're going to have wolves left and right, and that's going to be really cool. Plus, obviously, Wind Fury is always really nice, considering that you're going to have Outlaw and Havoc, although Havoc not as much. That will benefit from Wind Fury. You're likely going to have a little bit of love coming your way as an Enhancement Shaman for that Wind Fury totem. But at the very least, you're still pumping giga damage. You're still probably a little bit squishy, at least squishier than other specs here, but you're going to pump, and really, in the end, that's all that matters in both raids and dungeons. Feral also. Feral is surprising, but it's looking like Feral could make a comeback. It's also in the A tiers where I'm going to be putting it. Every time I look at Feral logs from anybody that's doing a decent amount of content and really playing the spec right, Feral is just pumping. In raids is doing surprisingly well, and in dungeons has kind of always been good, but mostly in the shadow of Balanced Druid and other melee specs. Now it's looking like it's going to be a lot better because the tier set is actually fantastic. With the focus on Feral Frenzy, you're going to have a 30-second burst damage profile going into the next year, and it's really fun. I've played a lot of Feral. It's kind of like my off spec for my main, so I vouch for this spec. Play it. It's going to be really good. Frost DK has also received a bunch of changes through his tier set, I think, ever since it was announced at the beginning of the beta cycle for 10.2. It has received 2 big changes that I know of. Is probably some constant tuning in the numbers and spells and so on and so forth. Now, I don't know what you're going to end up playing. Most likely Breath of Sindragosa in raids by the time you get the legendary axe, and Obliteration in Mythic Plus, and Obliteration everywhere else if you're going to be getting your legendary axe. Since we don't know how strong that is, the argument kind of goes for arms as well, and the DK spec, the other DK spec, we don't know where to place it based on the legendary weapon, but considering that it's going to be at least a bonus and Frost is doing okay, I will put it into B tier. It's solid. It's around survival. You're going to be doing pretty well. You're probably not going to hold your team back, but you're probably not going to pull any heads your way. Supposedly, everybody's playing at the same skill level because, you know, if you know what you're doing on Frost and you're just playing with people that are just switch specs here and there, you're probably going to out DPS a lot of them. Fury Warrior also around B tier as well. Warrior is kind of a dud in this season. At the very least, it's probably doing a little bit better in Mythic Plus than it is in raids, but in raids it's a little bit meh. I just wasn't impressed. I've tested Fury. Its tier set is very meh. Not to mention playset. I mean, we can talk about playset. You're gonna get probably bored of spamming 2 buttons. They did change the tier set so that it also affects Raging Blow. If I'm not mistaken, I think that change is still in, but it's still a very boring playstyle. It limits the, you know, you already have very few utility as a warrior, period, that you bring, let's say, in a Mythic Plus context, but arms will probably outburst you in AoE. However, you're probably still the more consistent of the 2 DPS specs for a warrior. If you do intend to main a warrior DPS and next patch, you're probably better off going with Fury if performance is what you're looking for. Ret is solid all around. It has been probably the best success story of Dragonflight. It is A tier, both raids and dungeons. Sure, it has some single target issues that will persist, but the new tier set with doubling your finishers, or your consumers, or whatever you want to call them, and they're finishers, right? It is giga fun to play on top of actually doing really good damage. You're probably going to have a lot more fun in Mythic Plus with the insane AoE burst that Retribution has. And you are okay in single target as well. You're just not going to be, let's say, assassination level okay. I predict at the very least. I could be wrong. We will see. Subtlety Rogue, also part of the Rogue rework, also doing really good, also getting buffs. So it's really nice to see. Subtlety Rogue is going into A tier. I would put it in front of everybody else. I don't know if it's better. Why is this? Is this bugged? Subtlety Rogue. It's in A tier. There you go. I would probably put it in front of the other DPS specs. I don't know if it's better than Assassination. Listen, I'm no big Giga Rogue player, but I did look at the logs and I did test a couple of specs on some damage profile training dummies, which is not a way to deal tier list, but it is a way to kind of grasp how they feel. Assassination just feels like it's going to be way better for raids. It feels like its burst is more consistent, although Subtlety has also been known for burst anyway, but they're both really good. And considering that all three rogues are in S and A tier, rogue mains are having a blast in 10.2, so you enjoy whichever one of these three specs you want to play. Unholy is also very interesting to rank, and actually Unholy and Windwalker are both the hardest to rank because their performance is kind of polar opposite. In raids, Unholy is Giga Chad. As we predicted in our last tier list, it doesn't seem like it has changed, and you're probably going to be even Giga-er if you get Augmentation and Power Infusion. Sure, the damage profile has been changed with a lot of tuning done from the 3-minute cooldown to the 45 seconds, which actually promotes better Mythic Plus performance, you would think, but still in Mythic Plus it feels like it's suffering maybe more than it should. But in raids is going to melt bosses and by extension tyrannical bosses in Mythic Plus. I would probably put it still into S tier for raids, but considering that in Mythic Plus seems to be pretty low, I will put it in the middle of the pack, like right here in A tier. So keep in mind, depending on what content you want to do, Unholy is probably going to be a way better choice for you if you intend to raid than it is for Mythic Plus. But then again, changes in tunings can always happen, so this could, be mixed with a little bit. Similar, but kind of like the polar opposite is Windwalker. Windwalker is actually really good in Mythic Plus, kind of has always been. It has really solid AoE damage, and then single target, sure. It's probably worse than Ret Paladin's, but its AoE is probably better, but it's apples and oranges at this point. Considering that Brewmaster is kind of like hard to rank, and Vengeance is probably going to be the premier tank next season, you're probably going to be the first monk spec that people will want to get into their groups, so that's not too bad. But overall, the raid performance is still very mediocre, so I kind of want to put it somewhere middle of the pack. Maybe put it in front of Survival. I want to put it into A tier, but I feel like Ret Paladin, Feral Druid are just doing way better. Sure, you have the monk utility, unique utility that monk has that nobody else brings, but in Mythic Plus, at the very least, you probably will see more Brewmaster than you might in Raid, and that's where Windwalker shines. So that's probably why I'm hesitant in putting into A tier, but this is how it looks. Obviously, keep in mind that this is just predictions. This is just looking at people playing the game, all the top players, whatever their content they're pushing and what their performance is, because we don't have actual concrete data to do a meta-analysis. This is still prediction, and it's still very early. The season hasn't even started yet, and things are looking the way they are, but it doesn't matter because the future WoW is so bright. And if you've missed it, we've covered the BlizzCon changes that you need to be aware of, all of the major things coming, so that gets you hyped for World of Warcraft. And if you ever wondered if 10.2 is a good time to come and play a melee spec, well, if anything, 11.0 is going to bring a lot of cool stuff for you to check out and be hyped and prepare for the release by, playing and watching the video.